Let's talk about how you would cite an academic article following the MLA Guidelines 8th edition. Now, there are two ways to cite an academic article, so it really depends if the article is in printed form or if you found it in a database, and we'll have a look at both of these in order. So let's start with a printed article, and what you can see is that there are really three parts to this kind of entry. So we start with the author. You can see that here. The author's name is inverted, so last name, comma, and then first name. And then we have this period here. And after each major element in a citation, we place a period, whereas inside that element, we tend to use commas. Then we're going to go to our second element here, and we have the title. Okay, there's our title. And notice the use of quotation marks here. So titles of academic articles go in between quotation marks. And then we want to capitalize all the important words. So notice that some of these words are capitalized, whereas others are not. And there are some specific rules for that. But in general, you don't have to capitalize articles and minor prepositions and so on. The exception would be is after a colon, for instance, then it's almost like you're starting over. And so we do need a capital for un here. Okay, so that's the second entry. The third part of your citation is what's called the container. And a container in MLA formatting, a container is kind of the unit that holds this particular article. So what we find here is that this whole container is a periodical or a journal. And so this goes all the way from research here, all the way to the end of the citation. This is the third part of our citation. And you can see now that there are commas in between all the elements here. Okay, we're setting things off with commas. And then when we get to the end, we have a period. So what goes into the container? Well, we first start with the title of the periodical, which we italicize. And notice again the capitalization. Then we have the volume and number, and what that refers to is that each periodical publishes in installments. So typically they might publish 4 times a year, let's say, every 3 months. And so the number refers to when in the year they publish. So the first number, or number 1, would mean that this would be the first issue for this particular year. The volume refers to a collection of a number of these issues. So every single issue in 2005 would likely be part of volume 5. Okay, so then we have the date after that, 2005. And notice again all the commas separating this information. The month here, December, this is optional. So you don't have to give the month, but if you do, you can abbreviate it and stick it in there. Then we have the page range at the very end. And if you were to have an article that only takes up 1 page, you would just put P period and then give the page. What is meant by the page range, incidentally, is that you're trying to give a sense of where the article starts and ends. So number 1 here refers to the first page of the article, and 14 is the very final page. And that would be the final page, you know, when all the citations are done as well. So if there's a work cited at the end, do include it in the page range. That's all you need to do for your kind of default article entry. And next we'll have a brief look as well as at what you can do for articles that appear in a database. So if the article does appear in a database, there are kind of 3 options for how you would cite it. And we've sort of given a couple here. One of them is to give what's called a DOI number. Okay, and a DOI number refers to a digital, we'll write it out for you here, a digital object identifier. And what that means is that this number is going to stay with the article, and that way you'll still be able to find the article even if the website changes or the database has changed its appearance and so on. So this is the preferred method, the DOI. If you can find one for a database, that would be great. The second option, second best, is to find what's called a persistent URL. Okay, so persistent URL. And a persistent URL is one that's often a little bit abbreviated, doesn't have all that other kind of garbage that goes with it, a little bit shorter, and it's going to stay the same, again, even if the website or the database changes a little bit. So that's your second option. The third option is just to take the URL right out of your browser, copy and paste it, and provide that. Okay, so those are your three options. If you do give the URL, so either option 2 or 3, you can get rid of the little bit that comes before. This is especially true for this third option here. You can get rid of this HTTP bit at the beginning, sometimes HTTPS as well. So you don't need that in your particular citation here. The other thing you can do with a URL is you can break it up. So you can see these slashes, and at the end of your line, if you wanted to, if your URL was really long, you could break it up there so that it doesn't have create this awkward spacing in your works cited entry. Watch out that your URL does not become a hyperlink. So sometimes if you keep typing after URL, it'll give that kind of blue line underneath. You don't want that. So as soon as that happens, just press Ctrl Z and that will undo that particular change. The exception would be if you are publishing your works cited page in an online context, then a URL might be quite nice because then people can actually link or click on it and get to the original source. So in these database entries then you have those three options: DOI, persistent URL, or URL, and try to pick one of those three if you can. The other thing you need just before that is the title of the database. So we've placed the title of the database here, and then a comma, then the URL, and then a period. And you can see we've done the same thing here. So there are lots of databases out there. There's JSTOR, MLA database, EBSCOhost. I mean, there's just a ton of these different databases, and it's nice if you can give that detail with your citation if you do know it. One optional element here, and this is accessed, the access date. So if you think that your URL might change a lot, this is especially true for option 3 here, then you're allowed to give an access date in this format, and this just tells the reader when you last checked the particular article, in case there is a kind of change that happens. But this is completely optional in the 8th edition of the MLA, so you can definitely leave it out if you like. So that's basically it for how to cite an article. Just a last few things to notice here. Notice the hanging indentation. Okay, so hanging indentation refers to the way after the first line in each entry you add a tab space, and you can see we've added extra tab spaces further down as our entries get longer. So that's definitely one thing to watch out for. And then the last thing to notice is that we talked about containers before, and we talked about how there's just one container in our first entry. If you look at the second and the third entry now, the database is essentially a second container. So if you wanted a sort of graphic image of this, what we have is we have this article which is found inside a journal or periodical, which again is found inside a database. And that's how that container system kind of works. You deal with one section by itself and then you cite it within these other sections. Last thing, and I promise I'll stop soon. If your instructor suggests that you don't need to give the database, even though you did read the article online, then that's perfectly fine. And in fact, the irony is that many academics who publish articles, when they use the MLA citation guide, they tend to not give the database. So that's quite common in academic publishing, even though professors often do ask their students to provide the database. So think about what your professor wants and try to, well, please him or her, I suppose. All right, so hopefully you found this useful, and all the best with your citations.